A 4-year-old orphan boy faints from hunger and is kicked by a store owner who says, "Hope you die." But a millionaire saw everything and did something that shocked everyone. Comment giving my story a rating from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The fragile little body of the 4-year-old orphan boy collapsed on the cold sidewalk, his thin limbs trembling like leaves in the wind as hunger consumed his last strength. His large, deep-set eyes, disproportionate to his gaunt face that looked more like a 2-year-old's, stared at the grey afternoon sky as if begging for a miracle that would never come. The corner store in the city's busiest downtown district bustled with activity around him, but no one seemed to notice the small figure huddled against the cold brick wall. The store owner, a burly man with thick arms covered in dark hair, emerged from his establishment carrying an old broom. His small, cruel eyes, sunken in a red face of anger, fixed on the child with utter disdain. Without hesitation, he raised his leg and delivered a brutal kick to the boy's fragile ribs, who whimpered softly and huddled even closer to the wall. "Get out of here, you little bum! I don't want any beggars in front of my store!" the merchant shouted, his raspy voice echoing through the busy street. "You scare away customers with that deadbeat face." The boy tried to get up, but his wobbly little legs couldn't support the weight of his malnourished body. Silent tears streamed down his dirty cheeks, leaving clean streaks in the layer of dust that covered his face. He had lost the ability to cry loudly long ago, after learning that the sound only attracted more violence. At that exact moment, a black import car stopped at the nearby traffic light. Through the tinted window, an elegant figure watched the whole horrific scene with growing unease. The 30-year-old millionaire, owner of a stunning beauty that seemed straight out of fashion magazines, felt something strange stirring inside her chest. Her golden hair fell in perfect waves over her shoulders, covered by an Italian wool coat, and her blue eyes, normally cold as ice, began to burn with an emotion she couldn't identify. She had built a financial empire based on cold, calculated decisions, accumulating a fortune that included investments in the stock market, applications in international funds, and even a small amount in Bitcoin that she kept as an emergency reserve. Her cosmetics company grossed millions, her net worth grew monthly, and she was known in the business world for her ability to turn any investment into profit. But there, seeing that child being beaten by a cowardly adult, all her business-like coldness seemed to melt like snow in the sun. The merchant was preparing to give another kick when the car door opened with a soft click. The woman stepped out in a fluid motion, her high-heeled shoes tapping the asphalt with determination. Her immediate presence changed the entire atmosphere of the street, as if a movie star had materialized in the middle of the chaotic urban scene. "Stop that immediately!" Her voice cut through the air like a sharp blade, carrying an authority that made powerful people tremble in board meetings. The fat man turned, surprised by the unexpected intervention. His eyes scanned the woman's elegant figure, from the expensive shoes to the gold watch that sparkled on her wrist, automatically calculating the value of each piece of clothing she wore. "This is none of your business, lady," he growled, although his voice had lost some of its earlier arrogance. "This brat is a pest who keeps bothering my customers." The millionaire approached the boy with determined steps, her heart pounding erratically. For the first time in years, she wasn't thinking about profits, dividends, or returns. An old and painful memory began to form on the periphery of her mind, like a shadow that insisted on taking shape. "He's just a child," she said, kneeling beside the boy, without caring that the expensive fabric of her skirt was now touching the dirty ground. "Look at him. Really look." The boy looked up at the woman, and for a moment she saw something there that made her gasp. It was the same expression that she herself had carried years ago, when her addict mother abandoned her in a cold, empty house, promising to return in a few hours and never appearing again. The memory hit her like a punch to the stomach, bringing back the feeling of absolute terror that she had experienced at the age of 6. "Are you okay?" she whispered to the boy, reaching out slowly so as not to frighten him. But the child pulled away sharply, his eyes filling with distrust. All the adults who had approached him with apparent kindness had ended up hurting him in some way. He had learned that sweet words only preceded bitter disappointments. "Don't touch me," he murmured, in a voice hoarse from shouting too much and for too long. "I don't want your pity." The boy's fierce rejection caught the millionaire by surprise. She was used to solving problems with checks and direct orders, but here was a situation that her money and influence couldn't fix instantly. The child's wounded pride was a barrier more solid than any business contract she had ever faced. The merchant seized the moment of hesitation to intrude again. "See? He doesn't want help. Now get out of my way before I call the cops." The threat made the businesswoman slowly stand up, her business mind kicking back into gear. She knew that a public confrontation could bring problems for her reputation, especially if it was filmed by some passerby, but something inside her refused to simply walk away and forget what she had witnessed. "This isn't over," she said to the merchant, her voice low but full of promise. Then she turned to the boy, who was now watching her with a mixture of curiosity and fear. "And you, little one, aren't alone in this world, even if you think you are." The boy watched her get into the car and leave, but her words lingered in his mind like a persistent echo. For the first time in months, a tiny spark of hope tried to ignite in his heart, but he quickly stifled it. Hope was a luxury that street children couldn't afford to indulge in. As the car disappeared into traffic, neither the woman nor the boy imagined that this encounter had planted the seeds of a journey that would forever change their lives. In the shadows of the corner store, the merchant watched everything with calculating eyes, already planning how to get rid of that problem once and for all before the rich woman came back to cause more confusion in his shady dealings. For 3 whole days, the millionaire couldn't get the image of the orphan boy out of her mind. Sitting in her office on the top floor of a mirrored building, surrounded by investment charts and financial reports that normally occupied all her attention, she found herself looking out the window towards the downtown neighborhood where she had witnessed that horrible scene. Her fingers drummed nervously on the mahogany desk as she tried to focus on the numbers dancing on the computer screen. But the dollar figures and stock indices seemed completely unimportant. On the morning of the 4th day, she made a decision that surprised even her personal assistant. She cancelled all the important meetings of the day, including a merger negotiation that could yield millions in profits, and ordered the driver to take her back to that busy neighborhood. This time, she had prepared. She had brought a suitcase full of children's clothes, expensive toys, and enough food to feed a child for weeks. But when she arrived at the corner store, the boy wasn't there. The burly merchant recognized her immediately and came out of his establishment with a hostile expression plastered on his red face. His dirty hands moved nervously, wiping themselves on a grease-stained apron that smelled of rotten food. "You again, lady?" he said with thinly veiled contempt. "I told you that brat isn't my problem. If you want to help so much, look for him in the dirty streets where he belongs." The woman felt a wave of anger rise in her throat, but she controlled herself. She had learned in business that showing emotions was a sign of weakness, and she needed information. "Just tell me where I can find him," she said in a calm voice, although her blue eyes shone dangerously. "I don't want any trouble with you." The man laughed sarcastically, revealing yellow and decayed teeth. "Trouble? Does the rich lady think she can come here and solve everything with her little money? That brat is a thief, a plague. He's probably in some alley sniffing glue or robbing other stores." The merchant's words hit the businesswoman like slaps in the face. She had never been spoken to that way, especially by someone who clearly had much fewer financial resources than she did. In her world of board meetings and multi-million-dollar negotiations, people always treated her with reverence, sometimes even with fear of her influence and accumulated capital. She decided to change her strategy. She took out an Italian leather wallet from her purse and took out several bills, offering them to the man with a forced smile. "Maybe this will change your willingness to help me," she said, holding out the money. The merchant's small eyes gleamed with greed, but he hesitated. There was something else going on here, something that he couldn't reveal for any amount. His shady connections with certain influential people in the neighborhood depended on his silence and discretion. "Keep your money," he muttered, but his voice trembled slightly. "I don't know anything about the boy." The refusal surprised the millionaire. In her experience, any problem could be solved with the right amount of money. Ordinary people always yielded when she raised the offer, whether in company acquisition negotiations or in personal situations. But here was a clearly needy man rejecting a sum that probably equated to months of revenue from his small corner store. Determined not to give up, she spent the rest of the day touring the streets of the neighborhood in her car, looking for any sign of the boy. Her elegant clothes and the import automobile attracted attention wherever she stopped, creating small crowds of onlookers who whispered among themselves about the unusual presence of that rich woman in their community. It was in the late afternoon, as the sun began to hide between the low buildings, that she finally found him. The boy was huddled behind a set of dumpsters in a narrow alley that smelled of urine and rotten food. His large eyes stared at nothing, as if he had completely given up any hope. She approached slowly, holding the suitcase of donations. "Do you remember me?" she asked softly, crouching down at a safe distance. The boy looked at her with a mixture of recognition and distrust. "The rich lady," he said in a hoarse voice. "Why did you come back?" "Because I can't stop thinking about you," she replied with surprising honesty. "I brought some things that I thought you might need." She opened the suitcase, revealing colorful clothes, toys still in their packaging, and packages of food. The boy's eyes widened for a moment, but then narrowed again with suspicion. "What do you want in return?" he asked, his voice laden with a bitterness that shouldn't exist in someone so young. The question caught her off guard. In her world, really, nothing was free. Every investment, every gesture of apparent generosity had an expected return, but there, at that moment, she couldn't identify what she expected to receive back. "I don't want anything," she said, pushing the suitcase towards the boy. "I just want you to have what you need." He looked at the offerings for a long moment, his small chest rising and falling rapidly. Then, in a sudden movement that surprised her, he kicked the suitcase hard, scattering its contents across the dirty floor of the alley. "I don't need your pity," he shouted, his voice echoing between the narrow walls. "All adults lie. Everyone hurts." Before she could respond, the boy had disappeared, running between the labyrinthine alleys of the neighborhood, leaving her alone with the gifts scattered on the floor like evidence of her first failed attempt to help. As she gathered the items with trembling hands, a painful memory returned with full force. She remembered herself at the age of 6, refusing the food offered by pious neighbors after her mother disappeared. The same anger, the same wounded pride, the same feeling that accepting help meant admitting that she had been abandoned forever. That night, alone in her empty mansion decorated with expensive furniture and works of art that cost fortunes, she made a decision that would completely change her approach. She would no longer try to solve everything quickly with money and gifts. If she really wanted to help that boy, she needed to learn to understand his pain, not just try to cover it with superficial solutions. She picked up the phone and called the best private investigator in the city, a man known for his discretion and efficiency in delicate cases. If she was going to help the boy for real, she needed to understand his story first, find out where he came from and why he was alone on the streets. "I need you to investigate a child," she said, when the detective answered. a boy of about 4 years who lives on the streets of the downtown area. I want to know everything about him, his family, how he got into this situation, if he has any living relatives." As she gave the details, she didn't imagine that this investigation would reveal secrets much more disturbing than she expected. The boy wasn't just alone. He carried an emotional burden that explained his absolute distrust of adults and his ironclad refusal to accept any kind of help. A week later, the private investigator called with information that made the millionaire's blood run cold. Sitting in her leather armchair in the office, she held the phone with increasing force as she listened to the devastating details of the investigation. The boy's name is... well, actually, he never had an official name registered. The detective's experienced voice sounded through the line. He lived with a twin sister in an abandoned house on the outskirts. 3 months ago, unknown men took the girl away in the middle of the night. The boy tried to stop them and was brutally beaten. Since then, he's been living on the streets looking for her. The businesswoman felt as if the air had been sucked from her lungs. Her hands began to tremble involuntarily, remembering the agonizing pain she felt when she lost her own younger sister in an accident when she was 8 years old. The guilt for not being able to protect her had shaped her entire controlling personality and obsession with success. "Continue," she managed to murmur, her voice coming out weaker than she intended. "There's more. The corner store owner has connections to a network that facilitates illegal adoptions. Wealthy families pay huge sums for young children, especially girls. The process is disguised as charity, but it's actually a lucrative business that exploits abandoned children." The revelation hit her like a punch to the gut. Her own social class, people with net worths similar to hers, were involved in separating those children. The money she had accumulated through smart investments and applications in international funds, the wealth she considered the fruit of her hard work, suddenly seemed tainted by association. "Did you find anything about the sisters' whereabouts?" "I'm still investigating, but I have a lead. An influential family in the upstate area adopted a girl of her age exactly 3 months ago. The documents look legitimate, but there are inconsistencies that suggest under-the-table payments." That same afternoon, the millionaire decided to look for the boy again. This time, she didn't bring gifts or food. She brought only the painful truth she had discovered and a promise she knew could destroy her financial life if she kept it. She found him in the same alley as before, but now he wasn't alone. 3 older teenagers surrounded him, demanding that he hand over some meager belongings he had managed to gather. The boy cowered against the wall, protecting a piece of stale bread against his chest as if it were a treasure. "Leave him alone," she said, approaching with firm steps. The teenagers turned, sizing her up with calculating eyes. They immediately recognized the signs of wealth in her clothes and accessories, but that only made them more aggressive. Well, look what we have here, a lost lady," one of them laughed sarcastically. "If you want to pass through here, you'll have to pay a toll." The businesswoman remained calm, her experience in tense negotiations kicking in. "How much do you want?" The question caught them by surprise. They expected fear or outrage, not a direct negotiation. They exchanged uncertain glances before one of them blurting out an absurdly high price for them. "$1,000," he said, trying to sound confident. She pulled out her wallet and counted the money slowly, placing the bills in the leader's hand. "Now get out of here and don't bother this child again." The teenagers left quickly, unable to believe how easily they had earned a fortune by their standards. But the boy looked at the woman with an even more distrustful expression than before. "Why did you do that?" he asked, his voice trembling with contained emotion. "Because I know about your sister," she answered directly, deciding that lies and half-truths wouldn't work with him. The impact of the words was immediate. The boy's eyes filled with tears that he tried desperately to hold back. His small body began to tremble, not from cold or hunger, but from the emotional weight he had been carrying for months. You "You know where she is?" he whispered, his voice breaking. The millionaire knelt down to his level, choosing her words carefully. "I'm trying to find out, but I need you to trust me. I need you to let me really help. Did they hurt her?" The words came out like a groan of pure pain. "I tried to protect her, but I was too small. They were too big and strong." The confession broke the businesswoman's heart. She saw there the same weight of guilt that she had carried since childhood, the same devastating feeling of having failed to protect someone she loved. "It wasn't your fault," she said firmly. "You were just a child. No one should have to protect another person at that age." For a few minutes they remained silent in the dirty alley, two people united by the pain of having lost sisters and the guilt of not being able to prevent it. The difference was that one had channeled that pain into obsessive financial success, while the other had been consumed by it completely. "If I let you help me," the boy said finally, "do you promise you'll find my sister? Even if it takes a long time, even if it's difficult?" "I promise," she replied, and for the first time in years she made a promise without calculating the costs or risks involved. In the following days, the businesswoman took actions that shocked even her personal assistant. She hired not only the private investigator, but an entire team of investigators specializing in child abduction cases. She established a special fund, separating a significant portion of her wealth exclusively for the search for the girl. The boy, still distrustful but desperately hopeful, began to accept small acts of help. Not expensive gifts or grand gestures, but basic necessities. Regular food, a safe place to sleep, clean clothes that he chose himself. But as the investigation progressed, disturbing details began to emerge. The family who had adopted a girl at the right time wasn't just wealthy. They had powerful political connections and enough influence to cover up irregularities. Even more alarming, neighbors reported that they never saw the child playing in the yard or leaving the house, as would be normal for a 4-year-old girl. The lead detective revealed a finding that made the millionaire question everything she believed about her own social class. The family didn't adopt the girl out of parental love. They needed someone to take care of the house, to do housework. It's a modern form of child slavery, disguised as charitable adoption. The information made her physically sick. People with similar resources to hers, who frequented the same exclusive clubs and invested in the same business opportunities, were exploiting vulnerable children. Her own cosmetics company, she realized with horror, had sold products to several families that she now suspected were involved in this network. That night, in her silent mansion, she made the most difficult decision of her business life. She called her lawyers and ordered them to prepare a lawsuit against the suspected family, knowing that this would mean confronting people with enough influence to destroy her reputation and harm her business. "I don't care about the consequences," she told the lead attorney. "I want my sister back, and I'm going to get her back no matter what it costs." The lawyer's confusion was evident. "Your sister, ma'am? I don't understand." She stopped, realizing the Freudian slip. For a moment the two girls had merged in her mind, the sister she lost in childhood and the sister of the boy she was now determined to save. The old pain and the present mission had become one in her wounded heart. 2 weeks after filing the lawsuit, the millionaire's life began to crumble in ways she never imagined possible. Important clients cancelled multi-million-dollar contracts with her cosmetics company, citing strategic differences that everyone knew were diplomatically constructed lies. Her stock market applications began to show mysterious losses, as if someone with privileged access was manipulating her investments against her. But the real revelation came when her private investigator appeared in her office with a pale face and trembling hands. He brought photographs that would confirm her worst nightmares and reveal a connection that would change everything. "I got these images from the family's property," he said, spreading the photos on the table. "The girl is there, but, ma'am, you need to prepare yourself for what you're going to see." In the grainy photographs taken with a telescopic lens, the businesswoman saw a little girl sweeping a huge patio, her thin arms struggling to carry a broom almost the size of her. The child wore dirty and torn clothes, completely different from the expensive clothes that an adopted daughter should wear. But it was in the last photo that she found the devastating truth. The girl had turned her face towards the camera by chance, and her big, sad eyes were identical to those of the orphan boy. There was no doubt. They were twin siblings separated by a cruel network that transformed vulnerable children into domestic slaves. "There's more," the detective continued in a heavy voice. "I investigated the connections further. The corner store owner isn't just an intermediary. He's a second cousin of the man who adopted the girl. This operation is a family affair, passed down from generation to generation." The discovery made her feel nauseous. For months, she had underestimated the complexity and scope of that exploitation network. They weren't simply random criminals. They were entire families structured around the suffering of abandoned children. That same afternoon, something unexpected happened that would completely change the course of events. While the millionaire was in her mansion planning the next legal steps, her maid ran to her in a panic. "Ma'am, there's a girl at the gate," she shouted, breathless. "A dirty little girl who says she's looking for her brother." The businesswoman's heart stopped for a moment. She ran to the gate and found exactly what she expected and feared. The sister of the orphan boy, too thin, hurt, but alive. The girl had managed to escape from the house where she was held captive, and through a miracle that she could never fully explain, had found the address of the rich woman who was trying to help her brother. "Are you the woman who's going to help me find my brother?" the girl asked in a weak but determined voice. "I heard the bad men talking about you. They said your name many times, angrily." The millionaire knelt down and hugged the child carefully, trying not to scare that small, wounded soul. "How did you manage to escape? How did you get here?" "I waited for them to fall asleep and went out through the basement window," she whispered. "I walked all night. People on the street gave me your address when I said I was looking for the rich woman who helps lost children." The girl's escape had triggered a series of events that the businesswoman had not foreseen. Within a few hours, her phone began to ring incessantly. There were direct threats, some veiled, others explicit. The family who held the girl captive had enough influence to make her life a living hell, and they wouldn't hesitate to use that power. But when she reunited the two siblings in her home, she witnessed something that was worth all the suffering and all the risks she had faced. The reunion was an explosion of pure emotions, crying, laughter, desperate hugs, and words of love mixed with tears of relief. The boy, who for months had carried the overwhelming guilt of not having protected his sister, was finally able to release all that pain. The girl, in turn, recounted through sobs how she had dreamed every night of the moment when she would see her brother again. "I knew you hadn't given up on me," she said, holding his small hands. "Even when they said you had forgotten me, I knew you were looking for me." In the days that followed, the millionaire faced the most difficult battle of her life. The family who had held the girl captive hired the best lawyers money could buy and launched a legal and social campaign to destroy her reputation. They claimed that she had kidnapped a minor, that she was mentally unstable, that her accusations were the delusions of a bored rich woman. Her bank accounts were temporarily frozen. Her investments in Bitcoin and other digital assets were blocked by routine investigations, and her cosmetics company faced a flurry of lawsuits for alleged irregularities that had magically appeared in government files. But amidst all this storm, something extraordinary was happening inside her own house. The two children, reunited after months of separation, began to heal not only their own emotional wounds, but also the old wounds of the woman who had saved them. The boy, who previously rejected any display of affection, began to trust again. He helped take care of his sister, protected her with a touching dedication, and gradually began to accept that not all adults were cruel or liars. The girl, despite the traumas suffered, maintained a special light in her eyes that reminded the businesswoman of her own lost sister. She asked questions about everything, explored every corner of the house with childlike curiosity, and slowly began to smile again. It was during one of those nights, when the children finally slept safely in a room prepared especially for them, that the millionaire made the final decision that would define the rest of her life. She called her chief accountant and ordered him to liquidate most of her investments and properties. She sold stocks, international funds, expensive jewelry, and even part of her gold and dollar reserves. With the money raised, she hired a team of lawyers specializing in children's rights and established a permanent legal fund to prosecute other families involved in that exploitation network. 3 months later, the legal battle came to an end in a way that no one expected. The pressure of the investigation had forced the exploiting family to confess their illegal activities in exchange for reduced sentences. The corner store owner was arrested along with several other intermediaries, and the illegal adoption network was completely dismantled. But the real victory wasn't in the courts or in the newspapers that reported the case. It was in the morning when the businesswoman woke up to the sound of children's laughter echoing through the halls of her house. It was in the moments when the siblings played in the yard, free from the fear and hunger that had dominated their lives. It was on the day she signed the legal adoption papers for the 2 children, officially becoming the mother of 2 little survivors who had transformed her empty existence into something full of purpose and love. The woman who had built an empire based on calculated coldness and purely financial decisions discovered that her true wealth wasn't in her net worth or her stock market investments. It was in the ability to love without expecting anything in return, to protect without seeking recognition, to give without calculating costs. Years later, when the siblings were grown up and studying at good schools, she often looked at photographs of that first day at the corner store and wondered how she'd been able to almost ignore that scene, how she had almost missed the opportunity to discover that saving those children actually meant saving herself. On her desk, now in a much more modest but infinitely happier office, she kept a phrase written by her adopted children. "Thank you for teaching us that family isn't about blood, but about choosing to stay even when everything gets tough." And every night before going to sleep, she silently gave thanks for having been brave enough to get out of the car that day and confront the cruelty she witnessed. Because sometimes miracles begin exactly when we decide that we can no longer pretend that we don't see the suffering around us.